I'm never doing door-to-door sales again.
DisastrousInvolvedI.
Disclaimer: the content presented in this video is purely fictional and intended for entertainment purposes only.
Lately, I've barely been able to keep my head above water financially. For the past 2 years, I've moved around chasing job listings and low rent. I've sank low enough to accept a door-to-door sale job. It had something to do with a water filter. I doubted the services were legit, but I got paid per sale. After 3 days of getting the door slammed in my face, I got desperate to head into a neighborhood with longer lawns and cracks in the sidewalk. I just needed one more sale and I swore I would quit this awful job. The sun had started to set by the time I arrived at the last house on the block. I considered not bothering with it. One of the front windows was broken with nothing but cardboard keeping the insects out. I regret ever going up the wooden front steps to knock on the door. A few seconds passed of silence after my short knocks. I had turned to leave when the door opened a crack. Inside was too dark to see the man's face fully. I was so surprised someone actually answered. I fumbled with the papers in my hands. "What are you selling?" The man asked in a deep voice. "I'm with the Clear Waters Filtration Systems. If I could have a moment of your time, I would like to display how dirty your tap water is." I said, my voice as tired as I felt from being on my feet all day. The man didn't move for a few seconds. He kept looking over me, trying to see if I was a threat. Finally, he opened the door the rest of the way to let me inside. I paused, debating on how much I needed this sale. The fact I hadn't had a meal in 2 days was the factor that made me follow the owner of the house. Inside was dark and smelled musty. I expected it to be dirty, but there wasn't much inside. The old floorboards creaked as he led me to the kitchen. The room was almost bare. A table with 2 chairs took up most of the space. There was a full knife block, a microwave, and a fridge. No dishwasher. No plates or mugs. Not even any trash. "May I have a cup of water to test?" I asked. My stomach turned. My body knew something was wrong before my brain caught up. The man was taller than me and well-built. He looked well-fed compared to my thinner frame. I wasn't always like this. Years ago, I was in shape, but not having reliable meals hit me hard. By the time I clued into my situation, it was far too late. I had already walked into a trap. Instead of getting a glass of water, the man took a step closer to me. I raised my clipboard as if they would protect me. He took me out with a single punch to the face. My body hit the ground hard, my nose bleeding. Panic started to set in. I shook my head, trying to clear my racing thoughts. I cursed the idea that I could have taken this guy in a fight a year ago and just how much I let myself go. His hands fell on me, causing me to struggle. I yelled as I kicked his legs. With some effort, he got me pinned down to the floor. He painfully pulled my arms behind my back. My wrists were held together with one hand as he used the other to slam my head on the ground hard enough to make my vision go black. In the few seconds I was out, he put a zip tie painfully around my wrists. I felt him lifting my body to my feet. I needed to do something. I jerked back out of his grasp to land hard against the counter. The knife block fell, causing a few of the blades to slide out. I grabbed a handle of one with my bound hands. I had a weapon, but no way to use it. A knock at the door made us both freeze. I almost screamed for help. A barrel of a gin pointing directly at my face made my mouth close. I let him force me into a chair. My hands still gripping the knife. He hadn't noticed. The man didn't need to say anything. His eyes told me everything I needed to know. I watched as he walked out of the room towards the door to a new victim. I heard muffled words as I frantically got to work cutting at the zip tie. I sliced open my fingers trying to use the knife. I felt the zip tie snap just as my attacker came back inside the room with someone new. I froze again. If I made a run for it, I would get shot. I needed to wait for the right moment to get the jump on this man, praying the element of surprise would beat his trigger finger. The new person had wavy black hair and a bright dimpled smile on his face. His pressed white shirt and sharp dress pants looked out of place in a house like this. He held some booklets in his hand. My face dropped when I read the words "The Watchtower" on the front. This poor guy was just trying to spread the good word only to get caught up with all of this. His smile faltered when he saw my face. His eyes followed the blood from my nose to my now stained shirt. "Is this a bad time? I can come back later." The newcomer spoke in a softer tone that matched his appearance. His face held a nervous smile. The man who led him inside again said nothing. When the newcomer moved to step away, he was caught in a flash. I winced at the sound of him hitting the table hard. The booklet spilled to the floor as the larger man pinned him down. "Please. I haven't seen anything." I won't, he started begging but got cut off. Just like myself, he had his wrists zip-tied together. When that was done, he was forced into the chair on the other end of the table, scared as hell. His entire body shook. I didn't blame him. My heart raced as I carefully waited for the right time to act. I can't believe how lucky I am. 2 products just knocked on my door. Here I thought I was only shipping one today. Now, behave. You're worth more alive. Our kidnapper spoke as he ran a hand over his bald head. I saw the gun in the back of his waistband. I judged the distance between us. Would I have enough time to reach him before he pulled his gun? Or should I wait until he got closer? I didn't have the chance to think through my plan. The stress of the situation was too much for the other man. He bolted upwards trying to escape. There was a quick struggle that ended in a single gunshot. I stared in horror as a body hit the floor. A pristine white shirt slowly started turning red with blood. I started to feel sick. My stomach turned over the simple fact that if I had acted sooner, this wouldn't have happened. I had a knife in my hand. And yet a man was now bleeding out on the floor in front of me. Like I said, you're worth more alive. The deep voice snapped me from my shock. Stepping over the body, the attacker took the 2 steps to my chair. The still hot muzzle of the gun was pressed to my cheek. I got dizzy from fear. My hand shook so badly that I nearly dropped the still hidden knife. I'll make you a deal. Call 2 people over here and I'll let you go free. He offered as he brought his face closer to mine. I smelled his terrible breath. I started to pull my head away, but he grabbed a fistful of short hair to keep me still. I don't. I stammered. I was going to tell the truth, that I truly didn't have anyone in my life I could call. Even if I did, he would just shoot them? For what purpose? Who would pay for dead bodies? Wasn't this all too risky? In the back of my mind, I knew the answer. One so gruesome I didn't dare consider it until the black-haired man on the floor moved. Our eyes met mine. Then his mouth formed a smile that made my body turn cold. Oh, come on. No one? A handsome guy like yourself must have a girlfriend. What about a relative or 2 you don't like? The man said in a mocking tone. I wasn't fully listening to him. As he spoke, the person I was positive had been shot dead started to silently move. The kidnapper's face was so focused on mine that he didn't notice what was happening right behind him. Turn around. I hissed, I'm not falling for that. He replied, his face dropping in anger. I felt his hands start looking through my pockets for my phone. I shook my head pleading for this man to just look over his shoulder. I no longer needed the knife for him. It would be best to save it for what came next. Turn the hell around. I snapped again. There's nothing, he yelled as he finally listened to my warning. He moved to be face to face with the man he just shot. I watched in disbelief as the thing I assumed to be a person got on all 4s to climb up the table, not making a sound. It easily scaled the wall to stand on the ceiling as if that was normal. A wide dimpled smile appeared on his face when the bald man finally saw what he invited into his house. To his credit, the man raised the gun faster than expected. His wrist was caught and snapped in one fluid motion. His cry of pain was cut short. He was swiftly tossed across the room, denting the cheap drywall on the other side. I caught the eyes of the monster before me. He gave a wink before jumping down from the ceiling. Sit tight. He said in a gentle voice I didn't trust. I needed to run. If this monster was focused on the other man, I had a chance to get away. I looked down at the bloodstained floor, also covered in religious pamphlets. WWJD had been written on the top of one of them. My face twitched into an annoyed smile for a second. I hated what I got myself into. I watched as the bald man got hauled back to his feet. His wrist was bruised and swollen. His head bleeding from going through the drywall. His body was forced into a chair by the strength of the false Jehovah's Witnesses. The chair was spun around so they were face to face. I gripped the knife tighter, waiting for whatever horrors I may see shortly. You were saying we were products. Who's your buyer? Is it Mr. Shark, or something else? The dark-haired man asked in a forced kind voice. He pinned down the other man's wrists to the chair. When that didn't fully work, he forced a knee into his stomach. Fuck you. If the seller ratted out his buyer, he would be placing a target on his back. If he didn't give up the information now, he would be tortured. Spilling what he knew saved him a great deal of pain, however his pride wouldn't allow it. For a moment, I thought they were at a stalemate. But monsters have a way of making people talk. A small tube with a point at the end came out of the dark-haired man's mouth. I jumped when it shot out directly into the corner of the bald man's eye. He let out a cut-off scream, then his body froze into place. When the tube slid out, only a small amount of blood trickled down his cheek. I saw the sheer terror in his frozen expression. Whatever this creature did, it made it impossible for him to fight back. We could have done this the easy way. Actually, so far, you've made my job very easy by letting me inside. Your greed made you take risks. Your gun gave you confidence. Such a shame you won't be able to learn from your mistakes. I expected this monster to sound cruel. But he used the same voice as he did when he first walked into the room. The fact he sounded so normal made my skin crawl. He raised both hands beside the bald head. His index fingers suddenly transformed into sharp curved claws that reminded me of insect legs. He placed the tip of a finger on the back of the man's head, slowly tracing a circle that connected in the front. If I had eaten recently, I would have thrown up at the sight of the top part of this person's head cleanly being lifted off, showing an exposed brain slowly pulsing. If I was a stronger person, I would have attacked the creature while it was distracted. Instead, I shut my eyes tight when the face of the monster in front of me changed. It went from a dimpled smile to a face opening into 4 segments. I didn't get a good enough look at it to see just how terrible this monster really was. But I heard some of it. The awful noises of a terrible mouth gorging on a gruesome meal. I didn't know how long I kept my eyes closed. It could have been minutes or an hour. There was a chance that because I wasn't a target, this creature may let me leave unharmed. I should have begged for my life to get that slim chance of walking away. I did something stupid. I decided the world didn't need a monster like this one and I needed to do something about it. I felt a hand fall on my shoulder. In a flash, I brought down the knife into this creature's neck. His face returned to normal. An offended expression appeared on his face. Ow. He said without any pain in his voice. At least I caught him slightly off guard. I stood up, grabbing his hand. He was confused enough to not shake out of my grasp long enough to let me do what I wanted. A burning sensation came from our hands. It jolted him enough to toss me into the counter. I expected that. I was now within reach of the knives and the only weapon in the room. If I went for them to start with, he would have stopped me. I needed to make him push me over here. My vision became blurry from stress and my empty stomach. I forced myself to move. In a second, he covered the distance between us. My goal was to cut off his head. Most creatures couldn't live after being decapitated. The knives were good enough to cut through bone. I needed to put extra power into them. Power my weak body didn't have. Within seconds my attack failed. I'd gotten a few more knives into his body, but he had me by the throat. My vision fading and my body weak. I saw his face open, ready for another meal. A loud thump from upstairs made him pause. His face returned to a human one. His grip lessened enough for me to breathe but not escape. He said 3 products, right? Let's go see who the third person is. The monster said. His dimpled smile returning. I didn't have the strength to fight him. I struggled in vain as he dragged me up the stairs to the bedroom where the noise came from. Again, I was tossed aside as he walked over to the shaking closet door. My legs buckled as I stood up. I needed to find a weapon, anything to stop him. I refused to give this monster one more meal. My heart dropped when small feet rushed out of the closet when the door opened. A child, no more than 4, attached themselves to the man's leg, crying for their father. My mouth became dry as he reached down to pick the child up. Looking over the dirty tear-stained face, I had to do something. As I looked around in the empty room for something useful, something unthinkable happened. The poor child wrapped small arms around the man's neck and started to sob. Carefully he raised his hands to better support the tiny body. His head slowly turned to let his eyes meet mine. My mouth slightly fell open at his expression. I swear I saw stars in his eyes. At first, I assumed his favorite meal was tender children's flesh, but it dawned on me that wasn't the case. It's so cute. The tension in my body drains after those words. I fell to the floor, exhausted in more ways than one. If you try to hurt this kid, I'll kill you. I warned even though I knew that wouldn't happen. Go find some soap. We'll get this thing washed up and I'll explain a few things. He offered. I wasn't expecting that. I refused to leave him alone with the child. Thankfully we found some dish soap in the bathroom. It would be good enough. I watched as the same creature who had a moment before eaten a man's brains from his skull gently washed off a poor boy's face and arms. Since we didn't have any clean clothing, he just washed any exposed skin. The kindness was enough to soothe the boy. The moment he was dried off, he fell asleep in the man's arms. I offered to hold the boy but got a scowl in response. Instead, I was handed a phone with the instructions to call the only number in the contacts list. A woman answered and I requested that she show up at the address the owner of the phone had been directed to go. I take it if you've dealt with supernatural creatures before. He said after the phone call. I nodded but didn't tell him anything else. You pulled a bit of magic from my hand. Most humans can't do that. If you took better care of yourself, you might have given me some trouble. You should leave before my handler gets here. Again, I stayed silent on my history with creatures. I wanted to focus on who he was and what he was doing here. I don't fully trust you'll eat the kid the moment I'm out of the room. I answered back, arms crossed. He looked me over, then started to undo the buttons of his collar. A black tattoo encircled his neck. I've seen this before and knew what it was. I'm on a leash. I can't harm anyone that isn't related to my job. There has been a ring of human traffickers lately. They're selling humans to supernatural creatures for all sorts of reasons. I'm tracking down the sellers, not the products. He explained, you were going to eat me. I pointed out, it was self-defense. You attacked me first. He said with a smug look on his face, I hated dealing with monsters for this reason. An old friend of mine said all supernatural creatures would make great lawyers. They all twisted words enough to give enough doubt to make their point seem valid. Nothing good ever came from talking with monsters. Let alone trying to make a deal with them. Someone came inside the house. A woman stormed up the stairs looking for the troublesome creature she had the job of looking after. She was beautiful but in a manufactured way. I bet it took her 2 hours each morning to get her makeup and hair just right. Through her rage, she didn't notice the reason why we called her at first, August. You better have a damn good reason for, oh my god, what do you have? She rushed over, hands out to take the boy from his arms. The monster refused for a moment, then carefully handed over the precious bundle. When his hands were free, his face dropped, and he made a distressed squeaking sound. Who are you? She asked, finally seeing the other person in the room. Innocent bystander. I commented with a shrug, shit. Well. Supernatural creatures are, she started, and I waved her off. I'm a retired contract worker. I know all about monsters and such. Is the kid going to be okay? She breathed a sigh of relief over not having to explain monsters to a normal person. Yes. We'll get in contact with the family. If he comes from a bad environment, we'll find the right home for him. Here's my card if you want any kind of follow-up. Did August attack you? You're bleeding. I rubbed my nose, only then realizing how bad I looked. I took the offered card but knew I wanted to just put this all behind me. I did no such thing. I'm on a leash. August. The monster said with his arms crossed, fuck off. We all know you're a little shit that causes problems. She growled back at him, it was self-defense. He added with a grin that made me want to punch him, don't worry about it. I'll leave you guys to your work. Just make sure the kid is taken care of. I went to leave but the woman was nice enough to offer to get me home. A few minutes later I found myself in my small apartment, my body sore and my only good shirt ruined by blood. I collapsed into bed, never wanting to deal with supernatural creatures again. I added a door-to-door salesman to the list of jobs I refused to do. A few days later I found myself staring at my phone. An email had come through saying I was paid for assisting in the human trafficking job. It was enough to cover my rent for 1 more month. But I was confused about why that monster would share the payment. Did his handler send me something because she felt bad I got dragged into that mess? Or was it August? I didn't know much about him, but he seemed like the type to not care about money. Giving it away was easier than thinking about how to spend it. I had other emails in my inbox. I quit hunting down monsters 2 years ago, but I still got the job requests from time to time. If I started back up again, I would only have to worry about my life, not my rent. I put my phone away, shaking my head. No matter what, I refused to go back to that life. Working in customer service was slightly less stressful.
Until next time, subscribe to stay up to date with all updates. No screamers or shocking moments, only comfort and safety. Bye.